Firstly, not a good idea to start your first series on the first week of the holidays. I've had all the young adults and all the young people going, "Oh, Rob, I'd love to be there, but we're going." Okay, fantastic. Let's go. Anyway, I'm going to start for the next 5 weeks, maybe a bit longer actually, 7 weeks. We're going to look, I'm going to do a series called Surprise the World. And it's not an original. In fact, there's a guy that wrote a book called Surprise the World, Michael Frost. And so this Surprise the World, we're essentially following the book now. Now, Michael Frost is an Australian pastor, theologian, teacher. He's a lecturer down at Morling College in Sydney. And he pastors a church down there as well. He's quite well known. He's written a number of books that are at the absolute front end of the discussion of what it is to live missional lives as followers of Jesus. So he gets offers for speaking engagements all over the world. He's a very highly credentialed kind of guy. He's a Baptist, although he hides that. And he's quite outspoken. I would say he's not a critic of the church, but he's a critical thinker of what makes the church and how we are to behave as the church. Some people don't particularly like the way that he thinks. Some people love it. But it's Michael Frost. Now, this book costs $10. And Koorong sells them, the internet sells them, and you can buy them. I've got 4 copies of it, and I've lent them all out. But as they come back to me, I'll just bring them. If you want to read them, you're quite welcome to take one of my copies. Doesn't have my name in it, so you can take it if it comes. But yeah, so I'd encourage you guys. There's 5 weeks of this. And Michael Frost puts in this book 5 missional habits that he thinks that would do us well for us to take on board. And it's not a mission strategy per se of how to do how to be culturally relevant or anything like that. It's actually, he talks about a habit, being an ingrained follower of Jesus and living an intentional life of being missional. He would say that a lot of us have fallen out of that. So he talks about these missional habits. He goes 3 things about these habits. It's about growing up in our relationship with God. So growing, learning, growing closer to the Father. Growing in, which is together as a community of believers who serve Jesus. And then going out into our neighbourhood as being missional. So up, in and out, that might come up a little bit as well. So it's a good read. And why are we doing this? Well, I'm doing this because at the absolute fundamental level, I believe that just as God sent Jesus to show us who the Father was because we didn't know and we need to be revealed, that just as Jesus was sent, then so too we are sent to reveal the Father and to reveal the truth about Jesus. That is a fundamental part of who we are. The Bible tells us things like to go into the world to proclaim the gospel, talk about Jesus, share Jesus, to declare his glory among the nations, it tells us. It says to go and make disciples, go into the world, proclaim the gospels. And Jesus even prayed this to his Father when he was on earth. He goes, "Father, just as you have sent me into the world, now I am sending them into the world." So just as he is sent, we are a sent people. And this is a whole thing about being missional in these habits, is this idea that you've been sent with a purpose and you have a vision, a purpose to fulfill, a role to play. You know, the Bible describes us as ambassadors, representatives. I don't need to go into that, The Bible describes us as being light. You can see a light in a vast space of darkness. The Bible describes us as being salt. You only need a little bit of salt and you can affect a whole area. It permeates through. The Bible it says that we will be his witnesses. Like this idea of being sent, being a representative of, following Jesus, a representative of a child of God and sharing the truth about the world, sharing the truth about the Father who loves us, is absolutely at the bottom of who we are as followers of Jesus. So I guess that's why we're doing this. I want to do over the next 7 weeks. We've got to challenge us. What are we doing about our sentness? What are we doing about what God has called us to do? Because this idea of being sent, it should be completely awe-inspiring that the creator of the universe has sent you to go on his behalf, to reveal him, he gives us purpose, he gives the world meaning, to show that to others. That should be the most amazing piece of news that we'd ever know, the most motivating force in our entire life. Doesn't matter whether, it could mean that we've got to change locations, could mean we've got to change cultures, or it could just mean that we engage with our neighbours in a different way, or it just could be this idea of these missional habits that we've been sent to go and do. And it should just be the most rewarding thing. We should never, I've said this a few times, but we will never ever feel any more like we are meant to feel. We'll never be as fulfilled as we are when we're doing what God's created us to do. We'll never feel like our life has any more meaning apart from when we're doing what God's asked us to do, to show him, to share him. So I do bang on about this a lot. We are called Christians for a reason, that we're little Christs. We don't have to do the work he did. He is the message and the messenger. We are just the messengers. But we are Christians, Christians. That's what we're called to be. That's what Jesus wants us to be. And Michael Frost in this book challenges us about how are we doing that? How are we going to do that? Everyone here, we all know that that being a follower of Jesus, that we should live generous and hospitable lives, and spirit-filled lives, and live in Christ-likeness. Do we know that we should be missionaries to our own neighbourhoods? I reckon a lot of us know those things, but also I feel like never before have Christians been more not feeling natural. Never have we ever felt as unnatural in our own skin than what we do right now. I reckon we're in this moment in time, in Australia specifically, where our Christian faith, we just want to just wrap that up in a little bit of a little tighter box publicly, and contain it, because we're a little bit threatened by what it might be to be a public Christian, or to share our views, because they are offensive now to many. They are. I'm not hiding that. We've never been at any stage as uncomfortable in our own skin, I reckon, as we do now. So Michael Frost, he says this. He says, we've heard a lot of sermons that talk about the fact that Christians should and need to understand themselves as evangelists. He says that. You've heard this idea that we're all evangelists, and maybe you've thought that that's what I'm alluding to now. Have you ever been to messages, or you've been to these evangelism conferences where you learn these prefabricated gospel messages that for you to share with any person that you come across, and we'll let you share it to them? Has anyone done that before? I have. And they've got their place, they're not bad, but these prefabricated ideas about how to present the gospel, and then you go out and you present it to everyone. But I don't know about you guys, but the whole idea of doing that is completely mortifying to a lot of people. A lot of people just go, oh, do I really have to do this? It's not an easy thought. And for whatever reason, whether it's our temperament, whether it's our lack of knowledge, whether it's our character, I'm too introverted to share my faith, or for whatever reason, lack of relationship, many feel inadequate to go and share that gospel in whatever good package that it might come in. It just doesn't feel natural. We end up feeling guilty that, I'm not doing what I'm supposed to be doing. And then our enthusiasm for evangelism goes, just be quiet about it. I'm just not an evangelist, and all those kind of things. That's one side, people get those. And then the other side, you get the confident people, and they'll go out, and they go out with so much enthusiasm that a lot of us are embarrassed by the amount of enthusiasm that they get. Like, have you seen in Melbourne at the corner of Collins Street? You have no idea what that is, but there's a big corner, and there's often a guy who'll bring his box and stand on it and preach. And he preaches from the word. He preaches what I believe that is the source of truth, and yet I'm embarrassed by him. Why is that? He's so gung-ho and so confident. And then how many, I don't know, you end up having conversations with non-believers trying to rescue them from being offended by the person who is over them. I don't know. Often we get embarrassed by that. So we ever get this idea of guilt. Oh, evangelism, I can't do it. Or, oh, embarrassing. What are you doing? Oh, no. And then I guess we can end up too at this position where we go, you know, I know what it is to be a Christian, to be an evangelist. All I have to do is befriend my neighbours and my work colleagues and invite them to church. That'll do. And none of those things are wrong. When I say they're wrong, I just think they're a little bit unfair. I've met a person that has been saved by a raging corner of the street evangelist, or kind of like that, a tele-evangelist. The guy who started the last church I was at was saved by a TV evangelist, and got a quite flamboyant one as well. So people can be saved by that. I've no doubt people have been saved by a handy, neat presentation of the gospel. I have absolutely no doubt. But the problem with both of these approaches to evangelism, one has too high an expectation of everyone. You are all evangelists. Go and preach the gospel to everyone. And the other one leaves us as being like church marketers, where all you've got to do actually is you don't have to do any evangelizing, but bring them to church. The church will evangelize them. That almost underplays your role in the field of evangelism, yeah? So one expects too much from you because not everyone is an evangelist, and the other one doesn't expect quite enough. Yes, we all of us have a responsibility to share our faith, to live public Christian lives. But the idea that everyone is an evangelist, I reckon, doesn't actually help. So where am I going with this? This is meant to be a missional living thing, and I'm telling you, you're not all evangelists. Well, I know lots of people that don't feel like evangelists anyway. Even though they've been told they are, they try it, and then they just don't do it effectively, or they don't feel comfortable with it, or they never have anyone that gives their life to Jesus. But I just want to challenge this idea that truly, regardless of how you feel about being a gifted evangelist, whether you have success or not, that deep down you are an evangelist. If only you'd operate out of your true identity. I just want to pose a question mark over that. Because I don't believe the Bible actually says that everyone is an evangelist. Everyone has a role to play within evangelism. But I don't believe everyone is an evangelist. Robbie, explain this to me. You're confusing me. So when it comes to evangelism, Paul has a twofold kind of component to evangelism. And Michael Frost talks about this quite briefly in this book. This is his very small book of a synopsis of a very large amount of writing he's done. Paul affirms the role of an evangelist, yeah? And I've got in Hebrews, that's bless the world. Anyway, that's the book cover. He affirms the role of an evangelist. He goes, now these are the gifts that Christ gave the church: the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, and the pastors and the teachers. So he affirms the gifting of the evangelist. And interesting that evangelism isn't the gift. The evangelist is the gift to the church. It's just quite interesting when you break that down. But anyway, but he writes as though all believers are to have be evangelistic in their general orientation. In verse 12, the very next verse. Is that verse? No, I've gone too far. Anyway, I'll read you verse 12. Their responsibility... This is the evangelist. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do his work and to build up the church, the body of Christ. So that there is the evangelist and the apostles and the prophets and the pastors and the teachers, yeah? So let me read that again because I've confused myself. Now there are gifts. Now these are the gifts Christ has given to the church: the apostles, the prophets, the evangelists, the pastors and teachers. Their responsibility is to equip God's people to do his work and to build up the church, the body of Christ. So every believer is to be evangelistic, but not every believer is the gifted evangelist, right? The evangelist is the gift to the broader group, the church. In Colossians 4, he says, devote yourselves to prayer. So this is Paul, who identifies himself as an apostle, yes, but as an evangelist, yes. And he's speaking to the church in Colossians, and you know that place. He goes, devote yourselves to prayer. Be watchful and thankful. And pray for us too, that God may open a door for our message so that we may proclaim the mystery of Christ, for which I am in chains. Pray that I may proclaim it clearly as I should. So for the gifted evangelist, Paul asks for opportunities to share Christ. That makes sense because that's what evangelists do. They share the opportunity to Christ. And he asks to be courageous about that and that he'll proclaim it clearly. But he doesn't suggest that the Colossians, I'm going to say, should pray the same thing about themselves. He says, going on to the next part, devote yourself, be wise in the way in which you act towards outsiders. So this is now the gifted evangelist talking to the church. Be wise in the way that you act towards outsiders. Make the most of every opportunity. Let your conversation always be full of grace, seasoned with salt, so that you may know how to answer everyone. So these evangelistic believers are supposed to pray for the gifted evangelists. I wrote this myself. I'm not going to use this again. It's too messy. But anyway, gifted evangelists, priorities, clarity in the gospel, alertness for opportunities to share it. The type of spoken ministry is bold proclamation, yeah? And then the evangelistic believer, because all of us have a role to play in the evangelism of the church. Be prayerful, watchfulness, wise socializing, and gracious answers is a brief summary, really, of what I've just read. If all Christians were leading lives that evoked questions from their friends, then opportunities of sharing your faith will come up. This is the whole idea of surprising the world. Wise socializing. What does he say? I should have left it up there. Being prayerfulness, watchfulness, gracious answers. Not every Christian is a gifted evangelist, but every Christian can speak about Jesus conversationally or with their life. Every Christian can talk about how they deal with suffering. Every Christian can talk about how they spend their holidays or why they spend their holidays serving people. Every Christian can open their doors to refugees or to foster kids and explain why they're doing that. Every Christian should be able to explain why they might be fasting through Lent or why Good Friday is important for them to go to church. Every Christian can explain about those things without actually being a gifted evangelist. Every Christian should be able to explain why they've made career choices that benefit the greater good rather than benefit in their own pocket. And there are many, many Christian business people that do those kind of things. There's this communication theory that talks about if predictability is high, then impact is low. So if an audience knows what someone's going to say, when they say it, the impact of them saying it is actually quite low. But when it is unpredictable and someone says something that's unexpected, well, the impact on the person hearing it is high, has a higher chance of them engaging it. That's why advertising, I don't know if you've seen the newest kind of trends in advertising is being completely left field because it grabs our attention. It wasn't what we're expecting. The Americans are a long way further down the track of doing it well, but there's ads out there that are really backwards and make you go, "Arr." So one of the primary one of the primary acts for outreach is this arousal of curiosity around non-believers of believers. The New Testament talks about it. The way you love one another will show that you are my people, and James talks a lot about that the way that we live needs to be in line with our faith because people see that and will know about the Father because of the way we do things. I'm going to read you a little bit of a story that's in this book. It's not a story, actually. It's fair income true. It's in the Roman world about 300 years after Christ has died. And the Roman world is a rough place. There are many gods. There are many superstitions and all those kind of things. And thousands and thousands of Christians at this point had infiltrated every single part of Roman life. And people were noticing because it was so different. They showed sacrificial acts of kindness. They showed love to strangers. They served poor people. They forgave their persecutors. They cared. They fed the hungry. It was stunningly different from anything that the world had ever seen up until this point. And fair income, this emperor, Julian, that ruled from 331 to 365, and in fact, someone took a photo. That's him, because he's a legitimate historical figure. He wrote about these Christians. Now, he refers to the Christians as Galileans, because that's what they were calling themselves. And when he says atheism, he's talking about Christianity, because he's a follower of minor gods, and so he thinks Christianity is atheism. And I'll read to you what he said. He thought that Christianity or Galileanism was a sickness, and so he penned a directive to try and fix it up. This is what he said. We must pay special attention to this point, and by this means effect a cure. For when it came about that the poor were neglected and overlooked by the priests, that is, his pagan priests, I think that impious Galileans observed this fact and devoted themselves to philanthropy. And they have gained the ascendancy in the worst of their deeds through the credit they win for such practices. For just as those who entice children with a cake and by throwing it to them 2 or 3 times induce them to follow them, and then when they are far away from their friends, cast them on board ships and sell them as slaves. By the same method, I say, Galileans also begin with their so-called love feasts and hospitality or service of tables, for they have many ways of carrying it out, and hence call it by all names. And the result is that they have led many into atheism, Christianity. So they had infiltrated by the way in which they were living their lives so deep into the Roman Empire that the emperor has recognized what they're doing. It is so surprising that he knows that he's losing too many of his subjects to this Galilean religion. And so he decides to set up an offensive against them. He mobilizes his officials and his own priests to outlove the Galileans, or the Christians. Here he goes. Why do we not observe that is their belligerence? Why do we not observe that is their belligerence to strangers, their care for the graves of the dead, and the pretended holiness of their lives that have done most to increase atheism? I believe that we ought really and truly to practice every one of these virtues. For it is a disgrace when the impious Galileans support not only their own poor, but ours as well. All men see that our people lack aid for us. Here is an emperor who has seen the work of the Christians infiltrating their people. And by his writings, we can see that he's concerned because so many are turning towards. These Galileans were living such surprising lives that it was turning his empire away from him. And as it has, he was the last, this emperor was the last God emperor. After that, you know how the emperors called themselves gods and they were treated, he was the last one. After that, it was no more. The Christian religion had so infiltrated the Roman Empire that it dismantled to a degree the structure of what they thought following a God was all about. So our challenge is now today is, what does it mean? What does it look like to live surprising, questionable lives today in our community? You know, acts of, I can't even say the word, philanthropy, philanthropic. I was trying to say it before, wasn't I, Karen? I couldn't get it out, so you'll have to forgive me. They're commonplace by Christians today. Am I saying we shouldn't do them? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. Christian businesses donating money to various, good. It's completely predictable. Should we not do them? Absolutely not. We should not stop doing them, is what I'm saying. Did I say that right? Church opens a feeding program. Is that surprising? Not really. I'm not saying we shouldn't open feeding programs. I'm not saying we shouldn't open beds and houses and all of those things. All of those things are brilliant, and the church should be continuing to do these things because it's a genuine expression of the grace of God. Yeah. One of the things that I find is a little bit strange is, like, say, I've come from a church, so I can pick on them, but I love them dearly, right? Is that there's a church very similar size to ours, and the great philanthropic, thank you, thing that they do is run an op shop. And it's a great ministry. They give lots of stuff away. They bless various groups with money and the opportunity to raise money. All of those are really fantastic. And the whole church hangs its hat on the fact that we run a fantastic op shop. And they really do. And they do a really good job for it. About 12 of them. What are the other 277 people doing? Oh, we help with the op shop. Well, they don't. So it's fantastic that churches do these big things, beds and feeding programs and money and Christian business giving, those things. But a church of some size can't hang its hat on what 12 people do when there's 270 other people that belong to that church. And sure, they might do things. I'm not bagging what those big things are. We should do things that express the grace of God in the community. And I'm not saying we shouldn't. But a lot of those things don't evoke the questions that were being asked of these Galileans back in the year 300. They don't raise the same, who are you and what are you doing? And that is so surprising. Our middle class lifestyles, and again, it's fine to be middle class. We're very upstanding and middle class in the suburbs. Unless we're intentional about it, don't raise questions about why we live the way that we live. Mowing the lawn, saying hello to our friends, driving washing the car, walking the dog, and being a nice work colleague is not an intriguing lifestyle anymore. So what are we going to do to surprise the world? I genuinely believe that we need to develop new rhythms and new habits of what it is to be intentionally missional. We've got to become, godly, intriguing, socially adventurous and joyous presences in the lives of non-believers. So how? By living intentionally engaging lives how do we live these lives that both announce, the reign of God and demonstrate his reigning today in our communities? How do we live our lives that demonstrate God's action in our communities and demonstrate his rule over our own lives? How do we do that? How do people see that? It's a question I want to look at over the next 5 weeks. So Foster puts together this plan. Bless, he calls it. Anyway, Bells is this little thing that he's going, BELLS. So bless, eat, listen, learn, and sent. The idea is that we bless people with generosity and hospitality, and you'll hear about that in the future. We eat with them. There's something special about eating around a meal. When do you connect best with people? When you have them over for dinner, yeah? I don't know, it's just how it works and it has forever. It's about listening to God, growing up into him. It's about learning about people's lives. It's about understanding that we're sent. So we're growing up, we're growing in together, and then we're being propelled out, yeah? And it's not designed, this whole idea. It's not the bee's knees missions strategy. This is not about a strategy. These are about forming habits, about forming lifestyles and intentionality in our lives that would allow us to surprise people? When was the last time you were over and abundantly generous? Over and abundantly generous. $50 isn't surprising. $100 is nice. I'm not saying, it's just a challenge. What is it to be abundantly generous financially now to someone? And not abundantly generous to someone who is another believer in need, although that's fine and that's fantastic. And when there are other believers in need, then abundantly give, yes. What about our unbelievers? Anyway, I could go on. I love that kind of stuff. So that's what we're going to look at over the next 5 weeks. How do we live surprising lives in the 21st century?